Everyone, this is Biology in Integrated Science. In our last lecture, it was explained that this course is actually about teaching you the biology concepts that are in integrated science. So when you are taught, you will acquire the necessary skills and you acquire the necessary knowledge and skills that are required of you to be able to teach biology concepts in integrated science, and it will give you the opportunity to be able to teach biology concepts even in biology as a subject. We in the last lecture we tried to look at personal health, where we look at some points or some different ways by which an individual needs to maintain his personal health. Then we look at what we mean by diseases. We look at the different types of diseases. So this day we shall be looking at activities, part of human activities that affect our environment. Now, when we talk about activities that affect our environment, the first thing we need to understand is, what do we actually mean by environment? When we talk about environment actually means those parts of the, maybe I say those parts of the universe, those parts of the earth that we are not the one, that are not made by us, that cannot be created by us or recreated by us, or that cannot be stopped by us. So when we talk about the environment, we're talking about places like water, that is the different bodies of water that we have. We're talking about air, we're talking about soil on land. So the first activity, or the first type of activity, that's made up of series of different activities under it that affects our environment, that we're going to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is pollution. And when we say pollution, what do we mean by pollution? Pollution is actually the introduction of harmful substances, that is substances that are harmful, that are dangerous, or what we refer to as contaminants, into our natural environment, that is into our environments that are natural. That's what we mean by our environment in biology. So when those substances that are not really part of this environment, when they are introduced into the environment, they become contaminants. They are harmful because they are not naturally part of the environment. And so these harmful substances are also referred to as pollutants. Now we have different types of pollution, and this first type, the first set we're going to look at, they are determined by where they you know the pollutants are discharged into, that is the environment. So we're going to look at the first one that I have here, that is air pollution. Air pollution simply means the release of chemicals or particulates or dangerous substances into the atmosphere. And this one is dangerous. It is actually prominent because it is common. We find it and it's always prominent in the atmosphere, but it is dangerous. And examples include something like burning of fuel, especially in our daily cooking, maybe those that use firewood, coal, even sometimes at home when you use gas or you use electric cooker, when you are cooking and something just got burnt, what you have being released into the atmosphere, that is an example of a pollution into the atmosphere. We also have discharge of carbon monoxide, especially from exhaustives. We have discharge of some other compounds like sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide from industries, and as well as some other discharge, from vehicles that we move around. Then we have water pollution. Water pollution simply means the release of substances, the release of poisonous substances into the bodies of water. When we say bodies of water, into bodies of water like ocean, seas, rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, all these are different bodies of water. When you have poisonous substances being released into different bodies of water, or released to the surface runoff flowing, that is the surface that are flowing into, flowing to surface waters, that is the running off that has moving to surface waters. So that is what we mean by water pollution. And we have examples like discharge of wastewater, different wastewaters from our companies, that is commercial and industrial waste. That is the waste that comes from different industries that as a result of the products they are producing there. Sometimes it may be because they want to clean their system, maybe it may be because they want to because it is part of the release from the product. So when we have this discharge, when you see most of these industries or factories, you see that their drainages are usually channeled into nearby bodies of water, maybe rivers or streams. So when we have this, and is an example of water pollution. We also have what we refer to as discharge of untreated domestic sewage. When we talk about domestic sewage, that is those two ones that normally comes out from our different houses. That is those sewage that normally comes from our different houses through our drainages. So those are examples of water pollution. We also have some chemical contaminants like chlorine. Then even the spraying of insecticide. Sometimes when we spray insecticide, maybe on farms or even around our environment. And sometimes when we also spray pesticide on plants, this sometimes you have excess landing on the surface of the soil, and water may wash them when rain falls into the nearby bodies of water. These ones, they normally affect the organisms, the aquatic organisms, by blocking the oxygen penetration into the water. Now another one we're going to look at is soil pollution. Soil pollution occurs when chemicals are released by spill, that is when they are spilling on the land or on the soil, or when you have leakages from some underground, maybe underground pipes or some underground tubes or large pipes that are being used to convey certain materials. So when you have certain chemicals, when you have a breakage, when these are broken, the chemicals or metals that are normally supposed to flow inside these pipes, they'll be released to the soil or to the land. So we have examples like release of heavy chemicals, release of hydrocarbons, release of chlorinated hydrocarbons, herbicides. Sometimes when we say herbicides, those are chemicals that are used to spray plants, herbs. Then we also have pesticides. Those are examples of soil pollution. Now let's look at the next one, which is referred to as noise pollution. In the case of noise pollution, this one is given the name as a result of that particular pollutant. The pollutant is noise. We have all the different sources of noise are noise pollution. For example, we have the roadway noise. When we talk about the roadway noise, most times when you are moving on the street or on the road, you hear sounds of vehicles. You have some vehicles blowing their horns for no reason sake. All these ones are examples of a noise pollution. We even have industrial noise. That is when these industries, when the industries are trying to produce their products, it results sometimes into noise. And when it results into noise, this type of noise, sometimes they are pollutants. So these are different types of noise pollution. Another thing is that even from the noise pollution, another thing or another source of noise pollution is from loud music. You see, most times those that sell out music in the olden days, when those that sells cassettes, but now we have those ones that may want to promote one artist or the other, and they now try to, because they have it available to sell, they will now start playing it. Or maybe they are fans of this artist, they will now loud it and it will be very, very high, and you will now perceive, you can hear it even as you move on the street. This is a type of noise pollution. This affects human ears, and sometimes it may lead to psychological problems like hearing impairment, and sometimes it leads to stress. That's why some people, when they hear too much noise, sometimes they are stressed up. We have other forms of pollution, such as plastic pollution. The plastics pollution is as a result of deposits of plastic at or in our environment. So when you have plastics being deposited or being discharged into any body of water, it is referred to as a plastic pollution. Or even if it is discharged to the soil or the land, that will be referred to as a land pollution. Then we also have what we call radioactive pollution. Radioactive are certain emissions that comes from different things, maybe like from some things like maybe like from nuclear materials. We even have radioactive uh, emissions or rays that comes from things maybe like from our screen, like from television screen and all this. So when it become too much into our environment, especially when they are discharged into, this one is commonly discharged into environments like into the atmosphere, and sometimes into the different water bodies, even can be discharged into the land. So this will be an example of a radioactive pollution. We also have what we call thermal or heat pollution. Thermal or heat pollution is when excessive heat is discharged into the environment. When it is discharged into the atmosphere, it is as a thermal or heat pollution. The same way when it is discharged into other environment. Now, what are the effects of pollution? As I discussed from the onset, I've been giving you examples of the effects of pollution, but let's look at general effects of pollution. The first one I've listed here is environmental degradation. When we say environmental degradation, that means the quality of our environment now reduces. For example, the quality of the air in the atmosphere reduces. You will agree with me that yes, the air that we breathe in right in cities like here, in cities are completely different from the air being breathed in or that is available to them in villages. The air in cities, in big cities like Lagos, like Port Harcourt in Nigeria, have been polluted. They have been polluted by different emissions or different discharge of different chemicals into the atmosphere. So the environment becomes degraded. The same thing even when the bodies of waters are polluted. These waters are being polluted in such a way that we cannot use those waters for anything. So the environment becomes degraded. It becomes reduced. The quality becomes reduced. Then the next effect is a negative influence on human health. We have the effects of pollution on on human health, and this effect or influence is positive, it's negative. So the first one that we have is that it causes waterborne diseases. You see, for example, when the water quality is degraded or when it is polluted, the quality of the water becomes reduced. And another thing is that it encourages the growth of those diseases, that is waterborne diseases, where you have a situation where oxygen, or where you have a situation where factors of diseases are inside, or causative agents of diseases are inside water. So like for example, when you have the spread of typhoid is usually common with water, especially when the water is unhealthy. And you also have influences like cancer, it can cause cancer. Like for example, people that are working in companies where the environment is polluted, they can result into cancer. Then you have infertile land. It can lead to infertile land, when chemicals have been poured on the land, the soil becomes polluted and the plants will not be able to get enough or uh, good uh, elements that are good for their development, and so the land becomes infertile for them. Then we have what we call global warming. Global warming is increased discharge of carbon dioxide into the environment. And when we have excessive discharge of carbon dioxide into our environment, it is called global warming. That means that you have limited amount of oxygen available, and we can control what we breathe in. That's what is happening. So we also have what we describe as a ozone layer depletion. uh, the earth rotates, and when the earth rotates around the sun. When the earth rotates around the sun, there is a particular layer that is preventing the direct heat, that is the direct rays of sun from reaching the earth surface. Because if the direct rays are reaching the sun directly, if the reaching the earth directly, it will be too excessive. That is, the heat will be too high, and so naturally there is a layer there. But this layer, because of our different activities, is becoming depleted. That is, it's being reduced, it's becoming thinner, and as becoming thinner, it's making it easier for the rays of light to be able to penetrate. Then how can we control pollution? The major way by which we can control pollution is to reduce or eliminate the release of pollutants into our natural environment. So this is very, very important. It is very, very important for us to be able to find a way of controlling the release of pollutants into our environment. And that is what has led to conservation. That is what has led to recycling, so that it's going to reduce the way we pollute our environment. So the next activity that we are going to look at that affects our environment is erosion. When we talk about erosion, erosion is the weathering away of the surface of the land by certain agents, and it describes continuous physical and chemical effects that causes soil to loosen and to move in new direction. When the soil loosens and moves in a new direction completely from its location, that is what we describe as erosion. But we have different types of erosion. We can also have water erosion. Water erosion occurs when the earth materials, for example rocks, when they are moved away by chemicals, that are in water, or force or flow of water in water, then we describe that as a water erosion. We also have what we call wind erosion. Wind erosion occurs when the earth particles like the sediments, the rocks, the pebbles, when these ones are carried by wind. This is referred to as a wind erosion, and this normally occurs in dry, bare areas. That is, in areas that are dry, in areas that are bare, in areas where you don't have trees. So it's always very easy for wind to continue to carry these earth particles. Now, the next one we're going to look at soil erosion. Soil erosion is when you have the movement or the removal of the soil by wind or maybe by flood. This one is very common around us. This one is what you see around. Though we have different types of soil erosion. When it just starts, we call it sheet erosion. That is when it's just starting, that is not noticeable. But when it becomes deep, that it begins to dig the land, it becomes deep and excessive. We call that gully erosion. Then we have another type of erosion that is referred to as glacier erosion. Glacier erosion is when you have giant body of ice that pick up, the giant body of ice that try to pick up huge pieces of rocks or houses, that can pick giant piece of ice that can pick up huge substances or huge images, just like can pick up the pieces of rocks, houses, examples like that. This giant body of ice is usually a combination of water, ice, some sediments that are picked up. So this gives it the eroding power to be able to carry this giant substances. Then we also have what we describe as sea erosion. Sea erosion occurs when rocks, pebbles, and sediments, when they are moved in the waves and they are smashed up against the shore. So when they are moved and they are smashed up against the shore, it is called a sea erosion. We have those ones like rocks, pebbles, sediments, which can be moved by the waves. And the salts also, the seas and oceans, they contain salts and some other chemicals. They can also weaken, with the movement, they can also weaken the rocks that are found at the coast of the seas or oceans. Now let's look at brief effects of erosion. One is displacement of rocks, soil, plants, seeds. When you have erosion taking place, some things will be carried away from their primary location to another place. Soil will be carried, rocks will be carried, even plants or seeds will be carried. Now we have another effect, and that is shrinking of habitats for organisms. When you have something like that, when you have erosion taking place, it's going to affect some organisms. Like, for example, we have some organisms that are referred to as microorganisms. Microorganisms, they live inside the soil, especially surface soil. So when erosion takes place, most of them will be eroded away. And when most of them are eroded away, some other organisms that live deep down, or some other plants that are there, will not be able to sustain themselves in that habitat again. So the habitat will be reduced only for some organisms that can be found in such an environment, or that can survive in the environment. Then we also have accumulation of sediment. We often see this one. That is when you have erosion, you have some things that are carried from different places, and you have them being carried to a particular place, especially on the lowland, that is the lower part of that land. Then we have removal of nutrients. When erosion takes place, definitely nutrients that are supposed to be absorbed by plants will be removed from the land, and when they are removed from the land or from the soil, it affects the plant, so it prevents the plants from growing appropriately. Then we have the next one, is how do we control erosion? The first one I have here is by maintaining vegetation around erosion prone area. So the moment we know that this is erosion prone area, that is, this is an area that is prone to erosion, where erosion can actually take place, then we try to make sure that that particular place is constantly being covered by vegetation. Then another one is use of cover crops. In a place where erosion is taking place, we can plant cover crops. Cover crops are crops that are referred to as, let me say, runners. That is, they don't grow tall. When you plant them, they grow, and as they grow, as they increase in length, they cover the surface of the soil. And how these ones control erosion is, when rain falls, it's going to eat, instead of the droplets eating the soil, the raindrop droplets eating the soil directly and washing the nutrients or washing the soil away, it will fall on the leaf surface. And when it falls on the leaf surface, the water will gently move to the ground. And when the water gently moves to the ground, the force has been reduced. And as the force has been reduced in this case, definitely you have the speed at which the runoff will move will be reduced, because even the movement will also be reduced by the plants, that is, by the stem and the roots that are the roots that are inside the soil. Then you have another way of controlling erosion that is popularly referred to as mulching. Mulching is commonly used where you have when people plant yam. It's usually the gathering of plants, that is the gathering of some plants, maybe let's say dead plants, to cover the surface, of the soil, so that the yam will not be destroyed. The yam that has been planted will not be destroyed by the heat of the sun. So in the same vein, this can also be done to control erosion. So dead plants will be used to cover the soil. That is why in most cases, when you see farmers that are preparing lands for the next farming season, you discover that when they cut, they don't remove the bush or the plant from the surface of from the surface of the soil. This is a way to prevent erosion from taking place. Then we have the last but not the least control that I have here. I call it terracing. Terracing is when you plant, you know, across the across the direction of an hill. You all know that the hill is usually vertical. Yeah, let me put it that way. So when you now take some plants, you now plant, instead of making ridges, you know, in a vertical way, you now make ridges across, that is in a horizontal way, and you plant like that. You make the ridges across the, across the hills. Then you now plant also, in a horizontal way. This is what you call terracing. And when you have something like this, it prevents, runoffs of rain from washing the soil away and from causing erosion. In that way, you have been able to control erosion. Thank you. Now, you have another thing that we need to learn, and that is we need to know, and that is deforestation. Deforestation is simply another activity that reduces, or that causes, or another human activities that actually affects our environment. Deforestation simply means the removal of forests by different activities, like for example by bush burning, by agricultural activities. When the planting season comes now, people begin to remove, or they have even started removing the plants on the surface of the soil. In some cases, they may even burn. So with that, they expose the land to, you know, to possible erosion. So deforestation is another activity, and deforestation is also caused by overgrazing. That is when overgrazing simply means when the cattle or animals, when they eat, and they eat more than it is necessary. They eat the plants, they graze on the plants more than necessary, very close to the ground. This is a deforestation. And we also have the commonest form of deforestation that we refer to as urbanization. Urbanization is when you have the removal of forest for the purpose of commercialization, for the purpose of maybe extension of cities, for industries, and for some other things. For example, if you travel from here to on the Lagos Ibadan Expressway, you discover that some places where we had forest before, we don't have forest there again. They have been cleared for construction of different types of companies. So this is an example of deforestation for urbanization purpose. Then we have what we call desertification. Desertification means setting in of deserts. In most cases, when deforestation takes place, the next thing that follows is desertification. That is when you have desert coming up. But we can also have desertification as a result of nature. That one will be referred to as natural desertification. And how do we get natural desertification? This is when there is no rainfall for a very long time, and this is described as droughts. So this one can, cause desertification, and you can also have a desertification as a result of overgrazing. That's why most times you have those ones from the northern part of the country. They normally send their, they normally bring their cattle so down to the south, because most times the overgrazing has taken place in the north. They have eaten the plants down to the ground, and the plants are not many because of the climatic factor. Then bush burning also can cause desertification. Deforestation can cause desertification, as I have said. Now, how can we control desertification? The first one is systematic planting of trees. That is, we try, when we say systematic, when you cut, we plant. Even when you don't cut any tree, we plant. So when we plant trees, we are trying to, we're trying to control deforestation. We are trying to control desertification. We are trying to control exposing the land to, you know, to some other adversities. Then another thing is, you as somebody that is knowledgeable in this area, as biology student and as future biology teachers, you are to encourage or to disallow cutting of trees. Disallow cutting of trees, encourage them, to stop cutting trees down. Discourage people from bush burning, discourage animal grazing, and all these ones, can actually take place by the governments. So we have been able to look at different human activities that affect our environment. Thank you very much for listening.